Alright, let's cut the nonsense. You think you're smart? You've got degrees, certifications, maybe even a shelf full of participation trophies, proving you're the brightest in the room. But let's get real. Intelligence isn't the get out of stupidity card you think it is. In fact, it might be the very thing leading you into the dumbest decisions of your life. That's the punch in the ego David Robson delivers in The Intelligence Trap. So buckle up, genius. This is gonna sting. Introduction. David Robson is not just some random guy with opinions. He's a science journalist who spent years neck deep in psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral research. He's written for outlets like The Guardian, BBC Future, and Scientific American, so he's no stranger to calling out humanity's nonsense on a global stage. And with The Intelligence Trap, he takes that calling to a whole new level. His mission? To prove that intelligence, your precious IQ, your Ivy League degree, your Mensa membership, isn't the armor you think it is. In fact, it's often the weapon you use to stab yourself in the back. Robson isn't here to stroke your ego. If anything, he's here to tear it down brick by brick, because let's face it, the smarter you are, the more you think you've got life figured out. But Robson's book delivers the hard truth. Intelligence, no matter how high, doesn't protect you from making staggeringly bad decisions. It doesn't stop you from falling for your biases, overestimating your expertise, or frankly, looking like an idiot on the world stage. The Intelligence Trap is a brutal, eye-opening exploration of why being smart doesn't mean being wise. Robson weaves together psychology, neuroscience, and history to expose how intelligence often backfires, making people overconfident, closed-minded, and blind to their own flaws. And no one is safe. Not scientists, not CEOs, not Nobel Prize winners, hell, not even you. This isn't just a takedown of smug intellectuals, though that's a satisfying bonus. Robson also offers solutions, a roadmap for escaping the trap. He teaches you how to pair intelligence with humility, how to challenge your biases, and how to develop the emotional and social skills that actually make you wise. Spoiler alert, it's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about knowing how to listen, learn, and question yourself before you faceplant into your own hubris. So, if you're ready to have your ego dragged through the mud and come out sharper, wiser, and a little more self-aware, this book is for you. If not, well, good luck, because The Intelligence Trap isn't just a book, it's a mirror, and what you see in it might not be as flattering as you think. Welcome to Mindful Reads Hub. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Rise and Fall of the Termites. Let's get something straight. Intelligence, as society has taught you to idolize it, is a flawed god. You might think a high IQ means a golden ticket to success, brilliance, and life on easy mode. Well, here's the wake-up call. Intelligence without wisdom is like a Ferrari without brakes. It looks impressive, but you're going to crash. Enter the termites, a group of overachieving child prodigies whose lives scream one loud truth: being smart is not enough. In 1921, psychologist Lewis Terman embarked on an audacious experiment. He gathered a cohort of 1,500 kids with IQs of 135 or higher, some even reaching the stratosphere of 200, and dubbed them the termites. These were supposed to be the future Einsteins, the kids who would single-handedly solve world hunger, cure diseases, and rewrite the laws of the universe. They were, in Terman's mind, the chosen ones. But spoiler alert, most of them turned out pretty average. Let's talk specifics. Yes, some of the termites did go on to achieve remarkable things. Nuclear physicists, Pulitzer Prize-winning authors, groundbreaking scientists. Sure, they had their shining stars. But the majority, they lived unremarkable lives, blending into society like intellectual chameleons. Even worse, a few of them outright floundered, leading lives marked by mediocrity or outright failure. Where was all that supposed genius, all that untapped potential that IQ tests were supposed to reveal? Terman believed that IQ was the be-all and end-all of human potential, a magic number that could predict not just academic achievement, but also creativity, leadership, morality, and happiness. He thought his termites were destined to dominate every field they entered. But Robson peels back the layers of this story to reveal Terman's fundamental mistake. He measured intelligence in the most narrow, reductionist way possible, assuming that abstract reasoning and factual recall were enough to capture the full complexity of human intellect. Here's the kicker. Terman's termites weren't even allowed to be fully representative of the population. He excluded kids from poor backgrounds, children of immigrants, and minorities, because, racism and classism were par for the course in early 20th century science. So the termites were a carefully curated batch of middle-class white kids groomed for success, yet still couldn't outperform the rest of humanity in any profound way. Robson doesn't just lay this failure at Terman's feet, he uses it to slam our ongoing obsession with standardized tests and IQ scores. Sure, these metrics might tell you who's good at solving abstract puzzles under timed conditions, but they're useless at capturing the kind of intelligence that actually matters in the real world: creativity, emotional resilience, adaptability, and wisdom. Take two examples from the termites. Beatrice, a prodigious young girl with an IQ of 192, could write poetry so sophisticated it fooled professional critics into thinking it was written by Tennyson. And yet, she grew up to lead a life of quiet mediocrity, dabbling in real estate with her husband's money. Then there's Sarah Ann, another termite whose IQ soared off the charts. She earned a PhD, but spent her later years couch surfing between friends' homes and briefly living in a commune. It wasn't that they weren't capable, it was that IQ alone couldn't translate into the kind of practical wisdom or emotional intelligence required to navigate life's complexities. And let's not forget the outliers on the other end of the spectrum. People who scored well below the termite threshold but went on to outperform the so-called geniuses. Robson uses these stories to remind us that intelligence isn't a straight line. It's a chaotic web of skills, experiences, and personal growth that no standardized test can measure. The core issue, Terman, and by extension our entire society, confused intelligence with wisdom. Intelligence is about speed and power, how fast you can process information and how much of it you can store. Wisdom, on the other hand, is about direction and control. It's knowing when to hit the brakes, when to pivot, and when to admit you've made a wrong turn. And guess what? A high IQ can actually hurt you in this department, making you arrogant, overconfident, and blind to your own biases. Here's a brutal truth bomb. Intelligence alone won't save you. If anything, it's a liability when paired with hubris, ignorance, or a lack of self-awareness. The termite's story is a cautionary tale for anyone who's ever thought, "I'm too smart to fail." No, you're not. Terman's experiment proved that intelligence without emotional depth, creativity, or adaptability is like a sharp knife with no handle. Useful in theory, but dangerous in practice. Key takeaways. 1. IQ is overrated. High scores on intelligence tests measure a very narrow range of skills. They don't account for emotional intelligence, creativity, or wisdom, which are often more critical in the real world. 2. Bias blinds us. Terman's exclusion of minorities and lower income kids shows how societal biases can taint even the most objective measures of intelligence. 3. Wisdom versus intelligence. Being smart isn't about how much you know, it's about how you apply what you know. And often, the smartest people are the worst at doing this. 4. Success is multifaceted. Many termites underperformed because raw intellect wasn't enough. Success requires a cocktail of skills, including resilience, social awareness, and adaptability. So next time you're tempted to flaunt your SAT scores or brag about how many books you've read, remember this. Intelligence is only as good as the wisdom that drives it. Without the latter, you're just a brainy fool waiting to trip over your own genius. Chapter 2. Entangled Arguments. Let's cut through the pleasantries. You probably think you're rational, that when you're in an argument, you're armed with nothing but cold, hard logic, a human algorithm slicing through the BS of the other person's flawed reasoning. But here's the truth. You're not rational. You're just good at dressing up your biases in a suit and tie, calling them facts, and defending them like a rabid lawyer. Congratulations, you're part of the problem this chapter obliterates. In Entangled Arguments, Robson goes straight for the jugular of the supposedly smart. The smarter you are, the more likely you are to fall victim to a vicious cycle of intellectual self-delusion. Why? Because intelligence is a double-edged sword. It gives you the ability to craft elaborate justifications for your beliefs instead of questioning whether those beliefs are right in the first place. Take Kary Mullis, Nobel Prize winner, scientific genius, and poster child for intellectual arrogance. Mullis revolutionized molecular biology by inventing PCR, a technique so groundbreaking it reshaped modern science. But did his brilliance make him immune to crackpot ideas? Not even close. Mullis believed HIV didn't cause AIDS, insisted global warming was a hoax, and swore he'd been abducted by aliens. Let that sink in. The same brain capable of transforming biology was also capable of rationalizing pseudoscientific garbage. Robson explains this phenomenon as the entangled argument, where intelligence becomes less about finding truth and more about defending your preconceptions at all costs. The smarter you are, the better you are at cherry-picking evidence, dismantling counter-arguments, and twisting logic to serve your agenda. It's not intelligence that makes you wise. It's your ability to step outside of your own head and question whether your arguments are leading you to the truth or just entrenching your stupidity. But let's not pretend Mullis is an anomaly. Robson pulls the curtain back on countless examples of intellectuals derailed by their own cognitive gymnastics. Consider Paul Frampton, a world-renowned physicist who fell for one of the dumbest cons in history. Frampton was lured into a fake relationship by a scammer posing as a model. Convinced of her love, he agreed to transport a suitcase for her and ended up being arrested with 2 kilograms of cocaine in Argentina. His genius couldn't save him from his own gullibility because he couldn't see the trap his emotions had set for his logic. Robson also brings up the infamous FBI mishandling of the 2004 Madrid train bombings. Using sophisticated fingerprint analysis, a supposed hallmark of rational evidence, the FBI identified Oregon lawyer Brandon Mayfield as a suspect. They were wrong, but instead of admitting their error, they doubled down, twisting their own interpretation of evidence to fit their flawed conclusion. It wasn't intelligence at work here, it was cognitive stubbornness masquerading as expertise. And don't think you're off the hook because you don't work for the FBI or have a Nobel Prize. You're just as guilty. Every time you refuse to back down in an argument, even when the facts clearly aren't on your side, you're demonstrating the same flawed reasoning. Robson argues that intelligence often makes this worse because it inflates our ego and makes us blind to our own biases. Smart people hate admitting they're wrong because it undermines their self-image. The solution? Intellectual humility, the ability to say, maybe I don't know as much as I think I do. But let's be honest, humility is an endangered species, especially among the so-called intellectual elite. Too often being smart becomes a performance, a way to prove you're better than everyone else rather than a tool to genuinely seek truth. Robson doesn't let anyone off easy, and neither should you. Whether it's Mullis inventing excuses for his pseudoscience, Frampton rationalizing his ridiculous decisions, or you digging in during a petty argument with your friend, the entangled argument is the ultimate trap. Intelligence becomes a tool for self-justification rather than self-reflection. Key takeaways. 1. Smart does not equal wise. Intelligence doesn't make you immune to bad ideas. It just makes you better at defending them. Bias is universal. Even the smartest people fall victim to cognitive biases, often doubling down on their mistakes instead of correcting them. 3. Emotions versus logic. Rationalizing emotional decisions with intellectual arguments is a classic trap, as seen in cases like Frampton's. Humility is crucial. The smartest thing you can do is admit you don't have all the answers. Intellectual humility is a far better measure of wisdom than IQ. In the end, this chapter delivers a brutal truth. Intelligence isn't a shield against stupidity. If anything, it's a magnifying glass for your biases. So the next time you find yourself arguing, stop and ask, am I trying to win or am I trying to learn? Because if it's the former, congratulations, you're just another smart fool. Chapter 3, The Curse of Knowledge. You think being knowledgeable is an asset, don't you? Well, let's burst that bubble. Knowledge is often a curse. That's right. The more you know, the more clueless you might actually be, especially when it comes to understanding others or explaining yourself. Sound counterintuitive? That's because it is, just like most of the smart things you believe about yourself. Robson digs deep into this phenomenon in The Curse of Knowledge, where he lays out how being informed often makes you insufferably bad at communicating, teaching, or relating to anyone who doesn't share your intellectual vantage point. Here's the gist. When you're steeped in expertise, you assume everyone else is swimming in the same pool of understanding. You forget what it's like to be a beginner, to not know the jargon, or to grasp the basic concepts you've taken for granted for years. This is the curse of knowledge, a cognitive blind spot that turns experts into the worst teachers, professionals into terrible communicators, and you into the know-it-all nobody listens to at parties. Robson illustrates this with a classic experiment by psychologists Elizabeth Newton and Lee Ross. In the study, tappers were asked to tap out the rhythm of a well-known song while listeners tried to guess what it was. Tappers assumed the listeners would instantly recognize the tune. It's so obvious, right? Wrong. The listeners got it right just 2.5% of the time. Why? Because the tappers couldn't unhear the melody playing in their own heads. They were cursed by their knowledge of the song, unable to comprehend what it was like to hear only disconnected taps. Now take that principle and apply it to everything you say, teach, or explain. You're the tapper. And your audience? They have no clue what song you're trying to play. But don't go thinking this curse is limited to party tricks or game shows. Robson shows how the curse of knowledge wreaks havoc in every field imaginable. Think doctors who throw around terms like iatrogenic and comorbidities as though their patients have PhDs in medicine. Or engineers who design user-friendly interfaces that leave actual users feeling like they're trying to crack the Enigma code. Even Nobel Prize winners fall into this trap. Just because you're brilliant doesn't mean you're capable of explaining your brilliance to anyone else. The curse of knowledge isn't just an annoyance, it has real-world consequences. Robson dives into examples from healthcare where doctors fail to adequately explain diagnoses and treatments, leading to confusion, mistrust, and non-compliance. He points to education systems where brilliant teachers fail to inspire students because they teach at a level far above what their audience can comprehend. And let's not even get started on corporate leaders who spew technobabble that alienates their teams. It's not just a curse, it's a plague. One of the most damning examples Robson shares is the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster. A team of engineers failed to effectively communicate the risks of damage to the shuttle's wing to NASA higher-ups. Their technical jargon and convoluted explanations obscured the urgency of the situation, leading to a catastrophic misjudgment. The curse of knowledge quite literally cost lives. But of course, being cursed doesn't absolve you of responsibility. Robson challenges you to own your curse and work to counteract it. It's not about dumbing things down, it's about bridging the gap between your knowledge and someone else's understanding. Want to break the curse? Stop assuming, start listening, and, for the love of clarity, explain things in terms people actually understand. He offers practical solutions like using analogies, asking for feedback, and trying to see the world from someone else's perspective. But let's be honest, most of you won't do this because you're too busy basking in the glow of your own intelligence to care whether anyone else understands you. That's the real tragedy of the curse. It feeds your ego while sabotaging your effectiveness. Here's the uncomfortable truth Robson doesn't shy away from. Being smart is useless if nobody can follow your train of thought. You might think you're dazzling the room with your knowledge, but if you're leaving people confused or alienated, you're not the genius you think you are. You're just another cursed know-it-all, screaming into the void. Key takeaways. 1. Knowledge creates blind spots. The more you know, the harder it is to imagine what it's like not to know. This blind spot makes you a terrible communicator. 2. Assumptions are the enemy. Experts often assume everyone shares their baseline understanding, leading to miscommunication and frustration. 3. The curse has real consequences. From botched medical explanations to fatal engineering failures, the curse of knowledge can have life-altering impacts. 4. Clarity is king. To break the curse, focus on empathy, simplicity, and feedback. Make your ideas accessible without losing their essence. So, next time you're lecturing someone on your area of expertise, pause. Ask yourself, am I tapping out a song no one else can hear? Because if you are, you're not enlightening anyone. You're just making noise. Chapter 4, Moral Algebra. Let's talk morality, or rather, your lack of it. That's right. Your shiny, self-righteous ethical framework isn't the unshakable foundation you think it is. Your moral compass is less like a compass and more like a weather vane, spinning wildly depending on your biases, emotions, and whatever convenient rationalization you can cook up to avoid confronting hard truths. In this chapter, Robson pulls no punches as he dismantles the myth of moral superiority and introduces us to the concept of moral algebra, a method for making ethical decisions that actually make sense, because spoiler alert, your intuition isn't cutting it. Robson begins with the brutal truth. Morality is messy. We like to think we're guided by clear principles, justice, fairness, honesty, but most of us are just winging it. Worse, we're incredibly inconsistent. One minute, you're judging someone harshly for a mistake. The next, you're excusing yourself for the exact same thing. This hypocrisy isn't just a moral failing, it's cognitive laziness. Your brain hates complexity, so it cuts corners, turning ethical dilemmas into black and white issues when they're anything but. Enter Benjamin Franklin, one of the smartest men to ever admit how stupid he was. Franklin developed a system for tackling difficult moral decisions, which he called moral algebra. The idea was simple: treat moral dilemmas like math problems. List the pros and cons of a decision, weigh them carefully, and only act when the evidence points clearly in one direction. Franklin believed that by applying rationality to morality, he could avoid the emotional traps that lead to poor decisions. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Most of us are terrible at this. Robson points out that our brains are wired for moral intuition, a gut-level sense of right and wrong that often overrides logical reasoning. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Intuition can help us make quick decisions in emergencies, but it's useless when we're faced with complex ethical questions. Worse, intuition is easily manipulated by emotions, biases, and social pressures, making it a poor foundation for consistent moral behavior. One example Robson uses to illustrate this is the famous trolley problem. You know the one. A runaway trolley is about to kill 5 people. You can save them by pulling a lever to divert the trolley onto another track, but doing so will kill 1 person instead. What do? Most people say they'd pull the lever, sacrificing 1 life to save 5. But then comes the twist. What if, instead of pulling a lever, you had to physically push a person onto the tracks to stop the trolley? Suddenly, most people refuse, even though the outcome is the same. Why? Because our moral intuition screams that pushing someone is worse than pulling a lever, even though logically the 2 actions are identical. This inconsistency is the hallmark of moral intuition, and it's why moral algebra is so important. Robson argues that by applying Franklin's method, we can rise above our gut reactions and make decisions that are not only more ethical, but also more consistent. He gives the example of John Stuart Mill, the philosopher who championed utilitarianism, the idea that the right action is the one that maximizes happiness for the greatest number of people. Mill didn't rely on intuition to reach this conclusion. He used logic, evidence, and a willingness to challenge his own assumptions. But don't think moral algebra is just about cold, hard logic. Robson emphasizes the importance of empathy in ethical decision-making. Without empathy, moral algebra becomes little more than a numbers game, reducing people to statistics. The goal isn't to strip emotion from morality, but to channel it in ways that support rational decision-making. This means recognizing your biases, questioning your assumptions, and considering perspectives other than your own. One of the most powerful examples in the chapter comes from medical ethics. Robson recounts the story of a hospital faced with a devastating choice. Limited resources meant they couldn't treat all their patients. Doctors had to decide who would receive care and who wouldn't, a gut-wrenching moral dilemma. Instead of relying on intuition, they developed a system for allocating resources based on objective criteria like survival odds and quality of life. It wasn't perfect, but it was fairer and more consistent than leaving such decisions to chance or emotion. So, where does this leave you? Robson challenges you to take a hard look at your own moral reasoning. Are you really as ethical as you think you are, or are you just good at rationalizing selfish decisions? Do you make choices based on evidence and empathy, or do you let your gut lead the way? Moral algebra isn't easy, and it's not always comfortable. It forces you to confront the messy, contradictory nature of morality and take responsibility for your choices. But if you're serious about being a better person, it's the only way forward. Key takeaways. 1. Morality is messy. Most of us are inconsistent and hypocritical in our moral reasoning, relying on gut instincts that often lead us astray. 2. Intuition is a trap. While moral intuition can be helpful in simple situations, it's unreliable when dealing with complex ethical dilemmas. 3. Moral algebra works. Applying rationality and evidence to moral decisions can help us rise above our biases and make more ethical choices. 4. Empathy is essential. Logic alone isn't enough. Empathy ensures that moral algebra remains grounded in humanity, not just numbers. Here's the bottom line. Morality isn't a feeling, it's a skill, one that requires practice, self-awareness, and a willingness to admit when you're wrong. So stop pretending your gut instincts are infallible and start doing the math. Because if you don't, you're not just making bad decisions, you're failing as a human being. Chapter 5. Your emotional compass. Let's face it, your emotions are running the show, whether you like it or not. You like to think of yourself as rational, that you're the captain of your cognitive ship, steering it through the stormy seas of life with logic and reason. Wrong. You're more like a shipwrecked sailor clutching a broken compass, dragged along by emotional currents you don't even realize are there. In your emotional compass, Robson ruthlessly dismantles the illusion of pure rationality, showing how emotions can either sabotage or supercharge your decision-making. Spoiler: if you don't learn to read the compass correctly, you're doomed to make some monumentally dumb choices. Robson kicks things off by tackling the myth that emotions and intelligence are opposites. It's a comforting delusion, one that lets you blame bad decisions on those pesky feelings while patting yourself on the back for your rational moments. But the truth is, emotions are inseparable from intelligence. They're the fuel that powers your decision-making engine, for better or worse. Ignoring them doesn't make you more rational. It just makes you blind to how they're already influencing you. Take Antonio Damasio's groundbreaking work with patients who had damage to the emotional centers of their brains. These individuals could think logically, analyze data, and weigh pros and cons with the precision of a supercomputer, but they were utterly incapable of making decisions. Why? Because emotions give value to your choices. Without them, you're stuck in an endless loop of analysis paralysis, unable to decide whether to order the chicken or the fish, let alone tackle a complex moral dilemma. So, if emotions are so vital, why do they so often steer us wrong? Robson argues that the problem isn't the emotions themselves, but how we interpret them. Emotions are like the weather. They can be unpredictable, overwhelming, and occasionally destructive, but if you know how to read the forecast, you can prepare for the storms instead of getting caught in the rain like an idiot without an umbrella. The trouble is, most of us are emotional illiterates. We either suppress our feelings, pretending they don't exist, or let them run wild, like toddlers hopped up on sugar. Neither approach works. Suppression leads to emotional explosions when you least expect them, while unchecked feelings turn you into a chaotic mess who makes decisions based on whatever you're feeling in the moment. Robson calls out this behavior for what it is: laziness. If you're not actively working to understand and manage your emotions, you're failing at one of the most important aspects of intelligence. One of the most compelling anecdotes Robson shares is about NASA's infamous Challenger disaster. The engineers knew there was a problem with the O-ring seals in cold weather, but instead of acting decisively, they let fear of rocking the boat cloud their judgment. The result? a catastrophic explosion that could have been avoided if they'd acknowledged and managed their emotions instead of letting them fester. Robson introduces the concept of emotional granularity, the ability to identify and articulate your emotions with precision. This isn't just about knowing whether you're happy or sad, it's about recognizing the nuances. Are you angry or are you frustrated? Are you nervous or are you excited? The more granular your understanding of your emotions, the better equipped you are to respond to them intelligently instead of reacting impulsively. But don't mistake this for emotional indulgence. Robson emphasizes the importance of pairing emotional awareness with self-regulation. It's not enough to know what you're feeling. You have to learn how to channel those feelings productively. This is where emotional intelligence, EQ, comes in. High EQ isn't about being touchy-feely. It's about mastering the interplay between emotion and reason. It's about using your emotional compass to steer you toward better decisions instead of crashing into the rocks of stupidity. Robson also explores how emotions influence group dynamics. In team settings, unmanaged emotions can spread like wildfire, creating a toxic atmosphere that undermines collaboration and decision-making. Think about the last time you were in a meeting where one person's bad mood set the tone for the entire discussion. That's emotional contagion at work, and it's one of the fastest ways to derail productivity. The antidote? Emotional awareness, not just at the individual level, but as a collective skill. Ultimately, Robson challenges you to stop treating emotions as the enemy and start seeing them as the powerful tools they are. Your emotional compass is always pointing somewhere. It's up to you to make sure it's leading you in the right direction. That means doing the hard work of self-reflection, learning to sit with discomfort, and building the emotional intelligence needed to navigate life's complexities. Or you can keep pretending you're rational while your emotions drag you around like a marionette. You're cool. Key takeaways. 1. Emotions aren't the enemy. They're an integral part of decision-making, giving value and meaning to your choices. Ignoring them doesn't make you rational, it makes you clueless. 2. Emotional literacy matters. The more precisely you can identify your emotions, the better equipped you are to respond intelligently instead of reacting impulsively. 3. Regulation is key. Emotional awareness is useless without self-regulation. Learn to channel your feelings productively instead of letting them control you. 4. Emotions shape groups. In team settings, emotional contagion can either strengthen collaboration or destroy it. Awareness and regulation aren't just individual skills, they're essential for group dynamics. Here's the bottom line: emotions are neither good nor bad, they're tools. Whether you use them to build something brilliant or destroy everything around you is entirely up to you. So, stop blaming your feelings for your failures and start learning how to read your emotional compass. Because if you don't, you're not just lost, you're your own worst enemy. Chapter 6, a bullshit detection kit. Let's not mince words. The world is full of bullshit, and so are you. That's not an insult, it's just reality. From politicians spinning half-truths to social media influencers hawking miracle diets, we're swimming in an ocean of nonsense. Worse, we're complicit in it, lapping up misinformation that confirms our biases while ignoring inconvenient truths. In a bullshit detection kit, Robson drags you into the intellectual ring and forces you to confront the uncomfortable fact that most of your beliefs are as shaky as a house of cards in a windstorm. If you want to escape the intelligence trap, it's time to build some defenses. Robson opens with a cold slap of reality. Smart people are especially vulnerable to bullshit. Why? Because intelligence often makes you overconfident in your ability to separate fact from fiction. You think your brain is a fortress, but it's more like a sieve, leaking biases, assumptions, and wishful thinking at every turn. And let's not forget the Dunning-Kruger effect, which reminds us that the less you know, the more you overestimate your competence. The smarter you think you are, the harder you fall. To combat this, Robson presents a bullshit detection kit inspired by Carl Sagan's famous baloney detection kit. The goal: equip you with the tools to sift through the noise and separate fact from fiction. But before you can wield these tools, you have to confront your own cognitive laziness. Let's be real, most of us don't want the truth. We want validation, we want to be right, and we'll go to great lengths to avoid information that challenges our beliefs. Take confirmation bias, for example. Robson explains how this mental shortcut leads us to seek out information that supports what we already think while dismissing anything that contradicts it. If you've ever scrolled through social media and felt smugly validated by an article that aligns with your worldview, congratulations, you've fallen for confirmation bias. But don't feel too bad, even Nobel Prize winners aren't immune. Look no further than Kari Mullis, who Robson calls out again for his AIDS denialism. Mullis wasn't just wrong, he actively sought out evidence to support his wild theories while ignoring mountains of data proving him wrong. The antidote to confirmation bias? Actively seeking disconfirming evidence. Robson challenges you to do the one thing your brain hates most. Question yourself. Ask, what if I'm wrong? And then actually look for answers. It's uncomfortable, but it's the only way to build intellectual resilience. Robson also dives into the role of fake news and misinformation in our current age. You might think you're too savvy to fall for clickbait or conspiracy theories, but think again. Studies show that even highly educated people are susceptible to fake news, especially when it aligns with their biases. Worse, misinformation spreads faster than truth, thanks to algorithms that prioritize engagement over accuracy. It's not enough to know what's true, you have to actively resist the lure of sensational lies. One of the most insidious forms of bullshit Robson explores is motivated reasoning. This is the mental gymnastics we perform to justify our beliefs, even when the evidence is stacked against us. Think about climate change deniers who cherry-pick data to argue that global warming is a hoax, or anti-vaxxers who cling to debunked studies because they align with their fears. Motivated reasoning isn't just a bad habit, it's a dangerous cognitive trap that can lead to catastrophic decisions. Robson doesn't just wag his finger at your cognitive flaws, he offers practical tools to fight back. One of the most powerful is Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. If a theory requires layers of convoluted reasoning to make sense, it's probably wrong. Another tool is probabilistic thinking, which involves assessing the likelihood of something being true based on available evidence. It's not about certainty, it's about making informed bets, but let's not pretend that logic alone can save you. Robson emphasizes the importance of emotional awareness in detecting bullshit. Fear, anger, and even hope can cloud your judgment, making you more susceptible to manipulation. If you're angry about a political issue or terrified by a health scare, pause. Ask yourself, is my emotional reaction driving my belief, or is it grounded in evidence? Spoiler, it's probably the former. One of the chapter's standout anecdotes involves the tobacco industry's infamous campaign to sow doubt about the link between smoking and cancer. Instead of outright denying the evidence, they used a classic bullshit tactic: fake expertise. They funded scientists to publish questionable studies, creating the illusion of controversy where none existed. The result? Decades of public confusion and countless preventable deaths. The lesson here is clear. Question the source of information, especially when it comes from parties with vested interests. Finally, Robson drives home the importance of intellectual humility. If you want to be a true bullshit detector, you have to accept that you're not always right. This means listening to opposing viewpoints, admitting when you're wrong, and being willing to change your mind in the face of new evidence. It's not easy, it's downright painful, but it's the price of intellectual integrity. Key takeaways. 1. Bullshit is everywhere. From fake news to motivated reasoning, misinformation is an unavoidable part of modern life. 2. Confirmation bias is your kryptonite. Stop seeking validation and start seeking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. 3. Use the tools. Equip yourself with critical thinking strategies like Occam's razor, probabilistic thinking, and questioning sources. 4. Emotions cloud judgment. Recognize when fear or anger is influencing your beliefs and pause before reacting. 5. Humility is key. Admitting you're wrong isn't a weakness, it's a strength that leads to better decisions. Here's the brutal truth. You're not as smart as you think you are, and the sooner you accept that, the better equipped you'll be to navigate a world drowning in bullshit. So stop congratulating yourself on your rational mind and start doing the hard work of thinking critically. Because if you don't, you're not just part of the problem, you're the poster child for it. 7. Tortoises and hares. Let's get one thing straight. You're not as efficient as you think you are. You might believe you're blazing through life like the hare, sprinting ahead with your boundless energy and brilliance. But here's the truth. You're running in circles. If you want to win the proverbial race, whether it's in learning, career, or personal growth, you need to slow down and embrace the tortoise's methodical pace. That's the hard truth Robson lays out in Tortoises and Hares, a chapter that eviscerates our obsession with speed and shows how true success comes from deliberate, sustained effort. Robson starts by calling out one of the most pervasive myths in modern life, the belief that faster is always better. We live in a culture that glorifies instant results, multitasking, and life hacks. But let's not kid ourselves. Speed is seductive, but it's often a shortcut to failure. Fast learners rarely retain what they've learned. Multitaskers accomplish less than focused workers, and quick decisions are usually bad decisions dressed in urgency's clothing. In short, being the hare might feel productive, but it's a recipe for long-term mediocrity. To drive the point home, Robson invokes the Dunning-Kruger effect again. Fast learners, much like overconfident idiots, often overestimate their abilities because they have mastered the surface without understanding the depths. They're like someone who crams for an exam, aces it, and then forgets everything 2 weeks later. Meanwhile, the tortoises, the slow, steady learners, build their knowledge brick by brick, creating a foundation that lasts. One of the most compelling examples Robson shares is the story of Benjamin Bloom's famous 2 sigma problem. Bloom studied different learning strategies and discovered that students who received one-on-one tutoring performed 2 standard deviations, or 2 sigma, better than those in traditional classrooms. Why? Because tutoring forced students to slow down, revisit concepts they didn't understand, and engage deeply with the material. In contrast, traditional classrooms moved too quickly, leaving most students grasping at straws. This isn't just about academics. Robson applies the tortoise and hare analogy to every facet of life, from skill acquisition to career development. Take the world of chess, where the best players aren't necessarily the ones who memorize thousands of opening moves. Instead, they're the ones who've spent years analyzing games, studying patterns, and learning to think several moves ahead. The same principle applies to athletes, musicians, and even entrepreneurs. Deliberate, slow practice beats flashy shortcuts every time. But here's the twist. Being a tortoise doesn't mean being slow in every sense. Robson emphasizes that it's about being strategic with your time and effort. Deliberate practice, working on your weaknesses, revisiting difficult concepts, and reflecting on your progress isn't glamorous, but it's the key to mastery. It's the difference between mindless repetition and intentional growth. Robson also dismantles the myth of multitasking, one of the hare's favorite tools. Multitasking isn't a superpower, it's a productivity killer. Studies show that switching between tasks fragments your attention, increases errors, and makes you slower overall. In other words, the hare's frantic attempts to do everything at once accomplish nothing. Meanwhile, the tortoise, who focuses on one task at a time, makes steady, meaningful progress. One of the most striking anecdotes in the chapter involves East Asian education systems. Students in countries like Japan and South Korea often outperform their Western peers, not because they're naturally smarter, but because their education systems emphasize sustained effort over quick wins. These students practice the concept of Kaizen, or continuous improvement, which prioritizes small incremental gains over flashy achievements. It's tortoise thinking in action, and it works. But let's not pretend that being a tortoise is easy. In a world obsessed with speed, slowing down feels counterintuitive. Robson argues that embracing the tortoise mindset requires a radical shift in perspective. You have to let go of the need for instant gratification, resist the urge to compare yourself to others, and focus on long-term growth instead of short-term success. It's not sexy, but it's effective. Robson ends the chapter by challenging you to rethink your approach to learning and productivity. Are you skimming the surface, chasing quick wins and calling it progress? Or are you willing to slow down, dig deep, and build something that lasts? If you're serious about success, it's time to stop sprinting and start strategizing, because in the race that really matters, the tortoise always wins. Key takeaways. 1. Speed is a trap. Fast learners and multitaskers often overestimate their abilities while missing out on deep understanding. 2. Deliberate practice matters. True mastery comes from slow, intentional effort, not quick fixes or shortcuts. 3. Multitasking is a lie. Switching between tasks reduces productivity and increases errors. Focus is the tortoise's secret weapon. 4. Cultural lessons. The success of East Asian education systems shows the power of sustained effort and continuous improvement. 5. Long-term thinking wins. Stop chasing instant results and start building a foundation for lasting success. So, are you ready to admit that your obsession with speed is holding you back? Or are you going to keep sprinting toward burnout, frustration, and mediocrity? The choice is yours. But remember, the tortoise doesn't just win the race, it defines it. Chapter 8. The benefits of eating bitter. Here's a reality check. You're soft. You flinch at discomfort, dodge challenges, and pat yourself on the back for taking the easiest possible path. But guess what? That cushy life you've built for yourself is holding you back. In The Benefits of Eating Bitter, Robson delivers a brutal wake-up call. True growth comes from pain, struggle, and, yes, failure. If you're not willing to embrace discomfort, you're not just stagnating, you're actively sabotaging your own potential. Robson begins by introducing the Chinese concept of qi ku, which translates to eating bitter. It's not just about enduring hardship, it's about seeking it out, recognizing its value, and using it as fuel for growth. The idea is simple but powerful. Every struggle, failure, and setback is an opportunity to strengthen your character and sharpen your skills. But let's be real, most people avoid bitterness like the plague. Why? Because it's hard, it's uncomfortable, and it forces you to confront your limitations. Robson doesn't mince words when calling out our modern aversion to struggle. From participation trophies to safe spaces, we've created a world where even the slightest hint of discomfort is seen as a problem to be solved rather than a challenge to be faced. But here's the kicker. Avoiding hardship doesn't make you stronger, it makes you weaker. If you're not willing to eat bitter, you'll never build the resilience, perseverance, or grit needed to achieve anything meaningful. To illustrate this, Robson dives into the world of education. He contrasts Western and East Asian approaches to learning, showing how cultural attitudes towards struggle shape student outcomes. In many East Asian countries, students are taught from an early age to embrace difficulty. If a math problem is hard, that's a good thing. It means you're learning. In the West, on the other hand, we treat struggle as a sign of failure. If something doesn't come easily, we assume we're just not good at it and give up. This difference in mindset explains why East Asian students consistently outperform their Western peers. They've learned to see struggle as a necessary part of the learning process, not a roadblock. Robson also explores the concept of desirable difficulties, a term coined by psychologists Robert Bjork and Elizabeth Bjork. The idea is that certain types of challenges, like spacing out your study sessions or practicing in less than ideal conditions, actually enhance learning and memory. It's counterintuitive, but the harder something is in the short term, the more likely you are to retain it in the long term. In other words, struggle isn't just a byproduct of learning, it's the engine that drives it. But let's not pretend that eating bitter is limited to academics. Robson shows how this principle applies to every area of life, from physical fitness to personal relationships to career development. He tells the story of Admiral Jim Stockdale, a Vietnam War POW who survived 7 years of brutal captivity by embracing the harsh realities of his situation. Stockdale didn't sugarcoat his struggles or cling to false hope. Instead, he faced the bitterness head-on, using it as a source of strength and resilience. His story is a testament to the power of Chiku and a stark reminder that avoiding hardship is never the answer. Robson also takes aim at our obsession with shortcuts and quick fixes. From get-rich-quick schemes to miracle weight loss programs, we're constantly looking for ways to bypass the struggle. But here's the harsh truth. There are no shortcuts to success. If you want to achieve something meaningful, you have to put in the work, endure the setbacks, and embrace the grind. Anything less is just self-delusion. One of the chapter's most powerful takeaways is the importance of a growth mindset, a concept popularized by psychologist Carol Dweck. People with a growth mindset see failure as an opportunity to learn and improve, while those with a fixed mindset view it as a personal indictment. Robson argues that cultivating a growth mindset is essential for eating bitter. If you're not willing to fail, you're not willing to grow. But let's be clear, eating bitter isn't about masochism or self-punishment. It's about recognizing the value of struggle and using it to propel yourself forward. It's about understanding that every bitter experience, whether it's a failed project, a tough workout, or a painful breakup, is a stepping stone to something greater. The question isn't whether you'll face hardship, it's whether you'll rise to meet it. Key takeaways. 1. Struggle fuels growth. Avoiding hardship might feel good in the short term, but it stunts your long-term potential. 2. Desirable difficulties work. Challenges that make learning harder in the moment often lead to better outcomes in the long run. 3. Mindset matters. A growth mindset, seeing failure as an opportunity to learn, is essential for embracing struggle. 4. No shortcuts. Success requires effort, persistence, and resilience. There's no way around it. 5. Cultural attitudes shape outcomes. East Asian cultures that embrace struggle produce students who outperform their Western counterparts. Here's the bottom line. You can either embrace the bitterness of struggle or choke on the sweetness of complacency. The choice is yours. But if you want to achieve anything worthwhile, you need to stop running from discomfort and start eating bitter. Because in the end, the things that challenge you are the things that change you. Chapter 9. The makings of a dream team. You think you're a team player? You're not. You're probably just another cog in a dysfunctional machine, convinced you're pulling your weight while secretly judging your coworkers for being idiots. But let's be real. Most teams are nothing more than glorified group projects where egos clash, communication breaks down, and productivity goes to die. In the makings of a dream team, Robson tears apart the myth of effortless collaboration and shows what it really takes to create a team that doesn't just function, but thrives. Spoiler, it starts with confronting your own BS. Robson wastes no time pointing out that intelligence, the supposed holy grail of team building, isn't the silver bullet we think it is. You can pack a room full of geniuses and still end up with chaos. Why? Because raw IQ doesn't guarantee cooperation, emotional intelligence, or the ability to see past your own ego. In fact, smart people often make the worst team players because they're more interested in being right than being effective. Take Nobel laureates William Shockley and James Watson. These guys were undeniably brilliant. Shockley helped invent the transistor, and Watson cracked the structure of DNA. But as teammates, absolute disasters. Shockley was so controlling and paranoid that his co-workers at Bell Labs staged a coup to get rid of him. Watson, meanwhile, alienated countless colleagues with his arrogance and inability to listen. Robson uses these examples to hammer home a brutal truth. Genius without humility is a recipe for dysfunction. So what does make a dream team? Robson points to research by psychologist Anita Woolley, who discovered that the most successful teams aren't the ones with the highest collective IQ, but those with the highest collective intelligence. And here's the kicker. Collective intelligence has less to do with individual smarts and more to do with emotional and social skills. Teams that communicate effectively, read each other's emotions, and give everyone a chance to contribute consistently outperform those that rely on a few star players. Robson also highlights the importance of psychological safety, a concept popularized by Harvard professor Amy Edmondson. Psychological safety is the sense that you can speak up, make mistakes, and challenge ideas without fear of being punished or ridiculed. It's the foundation of trust, and without it, teams are doomed to fail. Think about the last meeting where you had a good idea but didn't share it because you were afraid of being shot down. That's the absence of psychological safety, and it's a silent killer of innovation. Of course, building psychological safety isn't easy. It requires leaders who are willing to listen, admit their own mistakes, and create an environment where vulnerability isn't seen as weakness. Robson doesn't shy away from calling out the fact that most leaders are terrible at this. They're too focused on maintaining authority or pushing their own agenda to foster genuine collaboration. If you're in a leadership role and think this doesn't apply to you, congratulations, you're probably the problem. But let's not pretend that psychological safety is enough. Robson also emphasizes the importance of diversity, not just in demographics, but in perspectives and experiences. Homogeneous teams might feel comfortable, but they're prone to groupthink, where everyone agrees without questioning whether the idea is actually good. Diverse teams, on the other hand, are more likely to challenge assumptions, spot blind spots, and come up with creative solutions. The key, Robson argues, is to strike a balance between cohesion and dissent. Too much agreement and you stagnate. Too much conflict and you implode. The best teams foster constructive disagreement where ideas are challenged, not people. This requires emotional intelligence, active listening, and the willingness to put the team's goals above your own ego. One of the most compelling examples Robson shares is the story of Pixar, a company that's practically synonymous with creative excellence. Pixar's success isn't just a result of hiring talented individuals. It's about creating a culture where everyone, from animators to interns, feels empowered to contribute. They hold brain trust meetings where directors present their work in progress and receive unfiltered feedback from their peers. The focus isn't on tearing people down, but on improving the work, and that collaborative spirit is what makes Pixar's films consistently groundbreaking. But don't mistake this for kumbaya nonsense. Robson makes it clear that building a dream team takes hard work, brutal honesty, and a willingness to get uncomfortable. It means acknowledging your own blind spots, challenging your biases, and committing to the team's success over your own. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about creating an environment where everyone's intelligence can shine. Key takeaways: 1. Collective intelligence versus individual genius. Successful teams prioritize emotional and social skills over raw IQ. 2. Psychological safety is essential. Teams thrive when members feel safe to speak up, make mistakes, and challenge ideas. 3. Diversity fuels innovation. Different perspectives prevent groupthink and lead to better solutions. 4. Constructive conflict works. The best teams balance cohesion with the willingness to challenge ideas. 5. Leadership matters. Great leaders listen, admit mistakes, and foster a culture of collaboration and trust. So, are you ready to stop blaming your team for your failures and start taking responsibility for your role in its dysfunction? Or are you content to keep playing the lone genius, doomed to mediocrity because you can't get out of your own way? The choice is yours. But remember, no one wins the game alone, and the only way to build a dream team is to put the team first. Chapter 10. Stupidity spreading like wildfire. Let's talk about stupidity. Not the harmless kind where someone accidentally microwaves aluminum foil, but the viral, destructive, downright dangerous brand of stupidity that spreads through groups, communities, and even entire nations like an intellectual plague. In Stupidity Spreading Like Wildfire, Robson delivers a devastating takedown of the way bad ideas, misinformation, and groupthink infect even the smartest among us. If you thought intelligence was your shield, think again. Stupidity doesn't just survive in smart circles, it thrives. And guess what? You're probably part of the problem. Robson kicks things off by challenging the comforting notion that stupidity is an individual failing. Sure, we all know people who seem like walking cautionary tales, but collective stupidity, the kind that takes down organizations, governments, and entire societies, is a team sport. It's what happens when otherwise intelligent people stop thinking critically, start trusting the wrong sources, and let their biases run wild. You might think you're immune, but if you've ever forwarded a questionable headline, jumped on a bandwagon without fact-checking, or nodded along in a meeting while secretly thinking, "This is a terrible idea," congratulations, you've contributed to the wildfire. The chapter dives into the mechanisms that fuel collective stupidity, and Robson doesn't pull any punches. First on the chopping block is groupthink, the insidious phenomenon where a desire for harmony and consensus overrides critical thinking. In groups afflicted by groupthink, dissenting voices are silenced, bad ideas go unchallenged, and the collective IQ nosedives. One of Robson's most striking examples comes from the Bay of Pigs invasion, where US policymakers, blinded by their own echo chamber, launched a disastrously ill-conceived plan. The lesson: when everyone's too afraid to speak up, stupidity takes the wheel. Then there's the role of social media, which Robson describes as stupidity's jet fuel. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok reward sensationalism, tribalism, and outrage, creating the perfect breeding ground for misinformation. Algorithms amplify the loudest, most extreme voices, ensuring that bad ideas reach more people, faster. You might think you're smart enough to spot fake news, but studies show even the most educated individuals are susceptible, especially when the misinformation aligns with their biases. Stupidity loves company, and social media ensures it has a crowd. Robson also explores the concept of functional stupidity, a term coined by sociologists Mats Alvesson and Andre Spicer. Functional stupidity isn't about a lack of intelligence. It's about people willfully avoiding critical thinking in organizational settings. Think about the last time you sat through a meeting where everyone nodded along to a ridiculous idea because it came from the boss. That's functional stupidity in action, and it's the silent killer of innovation, accountability, and progress. One of the most damning anecdotes in the chapter involves the financial crisis of 2008. Robson highlights how a toxic cocktail of groupthink, overconfidence, and willful ignorance allowed subprime mortgages to balloon into an economic apocalypse. The warning signs were everywhere, but institutions ignored them because questioning the status quo was too inconvenient, too risky, or too uncomfortable. It wasn't a lack of intelligence that caused the crash. It was collective stupidity, fueled by greed and a refusal to challenge bad ideas. But it's not all doom and gloom. Robson argues that while stupidity spreads like wildfire, wisdom can too, if we're willing to fight for it. The antidote to collective stupidity starts with fostering a culture of questioning, encouraging dissent, promoting diversity of thought, and creating spaces where people feel safe to challenge the majority are essential. It also requires a commitment to intellectual humility, the willingness to admit you don't know everything, to listen to others, and to change your mind when the evidence demands it. Robson also stresses the importance of slowing down. Stupidity thrives on knee-jerk reactions, whether it's clicking share on a viral post or making snap decisions in a boardroom. Taking the time to fact-check, reflect, and consult multiple perspectives can be the difference between spreading stupidity and stopping it in its tracks. Finally, Robson highlights the need for better education, not just in schools but across all areas of society. Critical thinking, media literacy, and an understanding of cognitive biases should be as fundamental as math or reading. If you don't know how to spot bad ideas, how can you possibly avoid falling for them? And if you're not teaching these skills to others, you're leaving the door wide open for stupidity to spread. Key takeaways. 1. Stupidity is a team sport. Collective stupidity arises when groups prioritize harmony, trust the wrong sources, or suppress dissent. 2. Social media amplifies stupidity. Algorithms reward sensationalism and tribalism, spreading misinformation faster than ever. 3. Functional stupidity is dangerous. In organizations, avoiding critical thinking leads to bad decisions, stifled innovation, and catastrophic outcomes. 4. Questioning is essential. Encouraging dissent and diversity of thought is the best way to combat collective stupidity. 5. Education is the cure. Teaching critical thinking and media literacy is essential to inoculate society against the spread of bad ideas. Here's the hard truth. Stupidity isn't just out there, It's in here, in your mind, your group chats, your workplace, and your choices. If you're not actively working to fight it, you're letting it spread. So stop blaming them and start taking responsibility. Because if stupidity spreads like wildfire, it's up to you to be the firefighter, or burn with the rest. Epilogue. So here we are, at the end of David Robson's scathing, ego-popping journey through the minefield of human intelligence. And if you've been paying attention, you should be squirming right about now, because the epilogue isn't some neat little bow that ties everything up. It's a final warning, a challenge to stop wallowing in your intellectual arrogance and start doing the hard work of becoming wiser. Robson doesn't let you off the hook. He revisits the central theme of the book: intelligence, on its own, is dangerous. Without wisdom to guide it, your intellect is just a high-powered car with no brakes, one that's destined to crash and take a few people with it. If you've ever used your brain power to win arguments instead of solving problems, or if you've clung to your beliefs despite overwhelming evidence that you're wrong, congratulations, you've been living in the intelligence trap. The epilogue digs into the societal implications of this phenomenon. Robson argues that the stakes are higher than ever. In a world where misinformation spreads faster than facts and collective stupidity is turbocharged by social media algorithms, the need for critical thinking, humility, and collaboration has never been more urgent. But here's the kicker. Most people aren't interested in fixing the problem. We're too busy doubling down on our biases, curating our echo chambers, and pretending that our intelligence makes us invincible. But Robson isn't just here to roast you, though he does a great job of it. He also offers hope. Wisdom isn't some unattainable ideal reserved for philosophers or saints. It's a skill, a set of practices that anyone can develop. It's about learning to question your assumptions, seek out diverse perspectives, and admit when you're wrong. It's about recognizing that intelligence isn't a solo act, but a team sport, one that thrives on collaboration, empathy, and mutual respect. The epilogue challenges you to take what you've learned and apply it, not just to your own life, but to the world around you. Because let's face it, the intelligence trap isn't just your problem. It's a societal epidemic, one that's fueling everything from climate denial to political polarization to corporate greed. And if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Key takeaways. Wisdom is actionable. Intelligence is passive. Wisdom requires effort, reflection, and growth. The stakes are global. In the age of misinformation, collective stupidity is a threat to society. Be part of the solution. Challenge your biases, embrace humility, and prioritize collaboration over ego. Appendix: Taxonomies of Stupidity and Wisdom. The appendix of the intelligence trap is where David Robson gets surgical about stupidity and wisdom, dissecting them with cold precision. It's not just a list of traits, it's a final punch in the gut to remind you how easily you can slide into the traps of your own making. Stupidity, Robson explains, isn't a lack of intelligence, it's a failure to use the intelligence you have. It's arrogance, laziness, and the inability to admit when you're wrong. It's clinging to beliefs despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, doubling down on mistakes and rejecting the very tools that could save you from yourself. Robson categorizes stupidity into distinct flavors, each more insidious than the last. Motivated ignorance is one of the most dangerous. This isn't the harmless kind of stupidity where someone doesn't know better. It's the deliberate choice to avoid inconvenient truths. Think of the executive who ignores warnings about a failing project because admitting a mistake would hurt their ego, or the climate change denier who blocks out science to preserve their worldview. Motivated ignorance isn't passive, it's willful, and it turns otherwise smart people into agents of their own downfall. Then there's arrogant certainty, the kind of stupidity that digs its heels in and refuses to budge. You've seen it in conspiracy theorists, anti-vaxxers, and even academics who cling to outdated theories long after they've been debunked. Arrogant certainty is the ultimate intellectual roadblock. It stops learning in its tracks. The smarter you are, the more elaborate your rationalizations become, and the harder it is to break free from the straitjacket of your own convictions. Functional stupidity is the silent killer of innovation and progress. It's what happens when people stop questioning, stop thinking critically, and just follow the script. You've probably experienced it in the workplace where meetings become echo chambers and bad ideas are rubber stamped because no one wants to challenge authority. Functional stupidity thrives in environments where compliance is valued over creativity, and it's a surefire way to derail even the most promising ventures. On the flip side, Robson offers a taxonomy of wisdom that's just as specific. Wisdom isn't about having all the answers, it's about knowing how to find them. Intellectual humility is the cornerstone of wisdom, the ability to admit that you don't know everything and that your beliefs might be wrong. Wise people aren't afraid to say, "I don't know," because they understand that learning begins with questioning. Epistemic vigilance is another hallmark of wisdom. This is the ability to critically evaluate the information you're consuming, to question the credibility of your sources, and to recognize when you're being misled. In a world flooded with misinformation, epistemic vigilance is a survival skill. It's not enough to passively absorb information, you have to actively interrogate it, and that takes effort. Wisdom also requires emotional regulation. It's not about suppressing your feelings, but about recognizing when they're clouding your judgment. If you're making decisions based on fear, anger, or desperation, you're not thinking clearly, and you're setting yourself up for failure. Wise people know how to take a step back, assess the situation calmly, and make choices based on reason, not reaction. Finally, wisdom is rooted in empathy. It's the ability to see the world through someone else's eyes, to understand perspectives that differ from your own, and to value collaboration over conflict. Empathy isn't just a nice to have, it's an essential tool for solving problems, building relationships, and navigating a complex world. Wise people don't just argue their point, they listen, learn, and adapt. The Appendix is a brutal reminder that stupidity and wisdom aren't fixed traits, they're habits, choices, and patterns of thought. You don't have to stay stuck in the stupidity trap, but escaping it requires effort. It requires unlearning bad habits, challenging your biases, and embracing the discomfort of admitting when you're wrong. Wisdom isn't easy, but it's worth it. And if you're not willing to put in the work, well, you've already chosen your side. Conclusion. Here's the final challenge. After everything you've learned in the intelligence trap, are you actually going to do something about it? Or are you just going to nod along, feel smugly enlightened, and then go back to the same self-sabotaging habits? Because make no mistake, this book wasn't written to make you feel good. It's a call to arms, a direct confrontation with your own cognitive shortcomings. And if you're not ready to change how you think, congratulations, you've just proven Robson's entire point. The conclusion isn't a pat on the back, it's a final warning. Intelligence, no matter how much of it you have, is a dangerous tool if you don't know how to wield it. It can make you arrogant, blind to your own biases, and prone to doubling down on your worst ideas. Without wisdom, intelligence becomes a trap. A weapon you turn against yourself while convincing everyone else, and probably yourself, that you're the smartest person in the room. Robson's message is clear. Wisdom isn't optional. It's not some lofty ideal reserved for philosophers or monks. It's a survival skill. Wisdom is what keeps you from falling for your own BS, from making the same mistakes over and over, and from turning into a cautionary tale of how brilliance can lead to epic stupidity. It's about humility, self-awareness, critical thinking, and, yes, the courage to admit when you're wrong. But wisdom isn't just about you, it's about the world you live in. We're in an age of rampant misinformation, tribalism, and global crises that demand collaborative, nuanced solutions. The intelligence trap isn't just a personal problem, it's a societal epidemic. If you're not actively working to escape it, you're letting the wildfire spread. So here's the final challenge. Pick up the tools Robson has laid out and start using them. Question your biases. Seek out perspectives that make you uncomfortable. Stop clinging to your ego and start building the kind of wisdom that actually changes lives, yours included. And if you're serious about stepping up, here's the next step. Buy the book. Dive into every chapter, every example, every insight that Robson offers. This summary? It's just the spark. The real work starts when you turn the page and commit to making wisdom your superpower. Because here's the truth. You don't want to be the person Robson's warning about. You don't want to be the overly confident fool who thinks they're too smart to fail. You want to be the person who knows better, who does better, and who refuses to be trapped by their own intelligence. So what's it going to be? Ignorance or action? The choice is yours. But let's be clear, if you choose the former, don't